Welcome to the Daily Objective. It is day 54 of the war in Israel. We haven't been doing much of news updates. The hostage deal is continuing, so hostages are being released. Terrorists are being released in exchange. There is a ceasefire for now. That is pretty much the news. I mean, there's some ongoing psychological warfare by Hamas as you would expect. And but yeah, if people actually want more extensive news updates, let us know. And certainly when there is when it is a big news day, we will do that.
Well, I'll tell you though, Razi, I heard some reports from people who were released, and some of those reports are kind of disturbing. Being forced to watch videos of the October 7th atrocities. There was one male hostage who said he was beaten regularly, almost every day. People being held in the dark for over a month. I mean, it is really disturbing.
Being starved as well. They were fed.
Starved as
Yeah.
well, exactly. It's very disturbing to me, I mean, they continue to violate human rights, and the only people who, in some people's minds, are violating human rights are Israel, which is simply defending itself. But the clear violations of, I mean, senseless agony that they're inflicting upon these hostages, the taking of innocent civilians, the taking of children and grandmothers as hostages, but then you look at the way they're treating them, it's disgusting. It's itself an atrocity. That would be my thought on the latest news.
Yeah. And by the
I'm
way, we will talk about.
happy. I'm
Well,
happy when hostages get released, but I'm just worried that we're setting up another October 7th and another October 7th. Israel is releasing terrorists that are perfectly capable of doing another October 7th, just as Hamas has promised that there will be October 7th after October 7th until Israel is gone. Um,
yeah, which is something, that's a moment that's going to be a moment of celebration for many in the West, and that, by the way, is the topic of the reality show today. We're going to talk about modern day Holocaust denial, and I will talk about it also in the context of some of the reaction to the reports of how the hostages have been treated. Um, there was another point you just made that I was going to reply to, and I don't remember now what it was, but anyway, but yeah, this is this is, it is an ongoing situation, and it's by the way, one of the, I think today's episode, after 2 days of talking about Norman Finkelstein and B'Tselem, this is a kind of a lighter topic. Of course, in 27 minutes, we will be talking about Owen Jones and Novara Media. So it's not completely a light topic. Actually, this is not a light topic. It's just more of a historical context here. So yeah, James, we are talking today about the UN partition plan, which was voted on. The UN voted in favor of it on November 29th, 1947. And by the way, this is Ayn Rand Center UK. And as we've mentioned in the past, is a good time to repeat that the UK abstained in that vote, as it did in the recent vote on a ceasefire. And we should always repeat, when we talk about a ceasefire sounds nice. People stop dying. No, ceasefire is a win for Hamas. It's an encouragement for future attacks, and it's if you support a ceasefire, you support the Hamas atrocities. There are no two ways about it, and you want more of those to happen, because as long as Hamas exists, as you mentioned, as they have promised, there will be more of that. But yeah, one
76
thing,
years
yeah.
ago, 76 years ago now, the United Nations voted for the partition of the British Mandate. Now, of course, Britain had been restricting, even before World War II, had been restricting Jewish immigration to the area, which after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire fell apart, and they'd been oppressing the entire region of the Middle East. They'd been everyone had been under the Arab or Jew had been under the thumb of the oppressive Ottoman Empire for centuries. And when World War I brought a collapse of that Ottoman Empire, of course, there was a partition that gave the Arab countries, even if they had to draw artificial lines, straight lines between Iraq and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and so forth, even if they drew artificial straight lines, they were going to give the indigenous Arab peoples who had just been liberated from the Ottoman Empire their own nation states. But Israel was left out of that. And indeed, what had been going on before, an ongoing Zionist movement of immigration, the British in the 1930s restricted. They would not allow Jews to migrate and continue the movement of Zionism. And in the face of what was going to happen in World War II, where what is it, 1/4 to 1/3 of the entire Jewish world population was wiped out in the Holocaust. And okay, that's a pretty serious thing. And in the wake of that, the British still, in 1947, with commissions that were designed to figure out what would be fair for a Jewish state or not, Britain still abstained from the partition agreement that a majority of UN countries did vote for to create Israel. And that was what, 76 years ago today.
Yeah. Now the reaction to the vote on that night, pretty much, we can look at it 76 years later and say, yeah, not much has changed. So in Israel, or what later became Israel, Jews celebrated. This was a great moment for them. There was finally going to be a Jewish state. This is 2 years after World War II ended, and Arabs did not celebrate. Arabs planned for war, war that they started against Israel on the day that it declared independence in May of 1948. And
in 1947, we got the inauguration of the term "from the river to the sea." It was a Palestinian, who we would call them today a Palestinian leader, but at the time, an Arab leader from the region literally said, in opposition to the 1947, to the partition plan, we will annihilate the Zionist state from the river to the sea. And that's when it began in 1947. They refused, and they said there would be violent. There were major Arab leaders in the region, from King Farouk in Egypt to the newly liberated Arab states on the Arabian Peninsula. They were all saying that there would be violent, continuous opposition to the creation of a Jewish state. I can't help but notice that when it comes to America and Europe, the right of Muslims to immigrate is an absolute right. How dare you suggest that people don't have a right to immigrate to Europe, even if they're Muslim? How dare you suggest that the United States not allow people to migrate in any numbers? Now, I am pro-immigration. I really do. I think a free country should be open, all other things being equal, depending on certain special circumstances. And I think there are some special circumstances when you let in a bunch of terrorists. But apart from that, I am pro-immigration. And the left is so pro-immigration, except when, of course, it comes to Israel and Jews who have been, for the last 150 years, migrating to Israel. The entire Zionist migration movement is an exercise in freedom of immigration from countries that were literally slaughtering them in Europe, literally slaughtering them within memory. The 1940s, like I say, a significant portion of world Jewry was wiped out in the Holocaust. And these lefties who are so pro-immigration, when it comes to Europe having to take in Muslims, or when it comes to America having to take in everybody, they're suddenly, when it comes to Arab states, they have a right to be racist in their anti-immigration policies. That was the official position, mind you, of the British government, as far as I could see, and of course, all the Arab states in the region that opposed Israel.
Yeah, and by the way, the people today calling, the people today who are more open or more honest about what they actually think, or let's say truthful about what they think, and say that they don't want Israel to exist, they suggest that the Jews go back to where they came from. Of course, where they came from is, as you mentioned, Arab countries where they would be slaughtered immediately, and European countries where they wouldn't be slaughtered immediately, but these are not welcoming. It's not. Jews don't feel welcome
For
in
6 million
Europe.
Jews, over 6 million Jewish civilians had been slaughtered in the 1940s. That was the recent memory. And more than that, their immigration to Israel was being restricted, even if these people had no other place to go. I mean, the horrors. I highly recommend an Otto Preminger film from the early 1960s called Exodus, starring Paul Newman, and it very much tells the desperate plight of Jewish immigrants who really had no home, that were completely abandoned, in effect, by the world community before the creation of Israel. And the creation of Israel and the migration there to create a Jewish state where Jews have always been. Now, there's arguments about, well, gee, the majority of the population in the general area was always Arab Muslim. Well, that's true. And geez, the areas where Israel is getting the right to have its country, those aren't majority owned yet by Zionists who are privately purchasing the land. That's in other areas. Okay. The point is that a country, as we objectivists uniquely know, the legitimacy of a country does not depend upon historical circumstance, ethnic or religious composition, or racial composition. It has to do with the recognition and enforcement of individual rights. There is no way. Look at the Arab states today. There is no way they would have granted freedom of speech and freedom of religion and basic civil rights to their Jewish population. They still don't. And rather than the world community saying, requiring of regional Arab states, no, you have to recognize the equal rights of Jews.
Yeah,
Instead of
they don't require they don't protect the rights of their of non-Jews.
their own people.
There is no recognition of rights anywhere in the Arab world. The only place in the Middle East where there is Israel. But I want to go back to
So the only legitimate state, my last thought there is the only legitimate state in the region from our standpoint is Israel. The only state with a claim to moral legitimacy from our perspective.
yeah,
That's all.
which should also tell you something about the people who the only state in the world that they are actively vocally opposing is Israel. And when they say, well, actually, it's not anti-Semitism, well, it raises a question. But back to 1947, 1948. So the partition plan gives the Jews a state. It was a smaller state than it ended up actually being, because I mean the Jews accepted it. The Zionist movement accepted it as was offered and as was agreed upon, and of course the Arabs did not, because the existence of a Jewish state was unacceptable to them. So they launched a war. They lost that war. Israel ended up being bigger than it actually was otherwise going to be. And
the confidence of Arab leaders of the world at the time was ridiculous. We'll have no problem, they said in the late 40s, wiping out the Zionist state.
it's
And of
not
course,
just
they lost pretty quickly and readily.
Yeah, it wasn't just the confidence of the Arab leaders. I mean, it didn't look, a smart bet would not be on Israel to actually win that war. And I think even Israel's allies back then, whoever was kind of an ally, I'm not even sure who would count as an ally back then, if it was the US, if it was Soviet Russia, if it was a little bit of both. Nobody actually thought that Israel would win that war, let alone win and gain territory. And when people sometimes when people talk about a peace deal between the what we now call the Palestinians and Israel, they talk about a return to the 1967 borders. Those are the borders pre the Six-Day War, before Israel expanded territorially, gained the Golan Heights, gained Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, gained the Gaza Strip. The people who call for a return to the 1967 borders, again, I don't give them the benefit of the doubt. They know that they are calling for a return to the 1947 borders. They know that they are calling for the extermination of Israel. They know that Israel is still surrounded by people who want nothing other than to exterminate the Jews, and you give them an advantage when you give them a territorial advantage when you give back those territories, which, just I'll quickly say, in the Golan Heights means they actually have the advantage from above, from the mountain, almost on the border of the Sea of Galilee, and in most of Israel in the center, you have the West Bank being in some places there's going to be 8 kilometers between between this future Palestinian state and the sea. and those 8 kilometers will be easy for the Palestinian state, certainly if it's armed, to to attack properly and cause
Exactly.
harm.
That's the whole thing. I mean, if they were to relinquish the Golan Heights, they'd be surrendering a military position that would make northern Israel under constant threat, and the civilians in northern Israel under the constant threat of the rockets and missiles that have been coming over. I mean, look, if it weren't for the fact that it is Arab Muslims that started the war in the late 1940s to destroy Israel, but failed, they also launched the war in the late 1960s, which so dramatically failed and lost them the West Bank and the Golan Heights. But wait a minute, they used the West Bank as a launching ground for an attack against Israel. If the West Bank, we call most of Judea and Samaria traditionally, what we call the West Bank was used, now mind you, a bunch of Jews, when the 47-48 partition happened, had to leave the area of the West Bank. Areas that had been part of them had been privately purchased by Jews in the West Bank had to be given up. So Israel gives up, in effect, the West Bank, only to have 20 years later that being the staging ground for the next Arab attack on Israel. And so if you're asking Israel to give up control of the West Bank or Golan Heights, you're asking them to go back and be repeatedly attacked again by their Arab neighbors again and again and again.
And Israel is attacked by its Arab neighbors again and again, even without that territorial advantage. So the next war was in 1973. Now, like
Right.
after Israel won in 1967, they said, "Let's sit and talk." They said, "Let's sit and talk" from the start. Israel wanted
From the
peace
start.
from the beginning. The problem is it's difficult for people who want to wipe you out to say, "Actually, but okay, we'll settle for peace." That's not
They've
gonna
been
happen.
offered peace again and again and again and again. In
And
my lifetime, I've heard Arab leaders, so-called moderate Fatah leaders, or the more extreme ones, both of them saying, no, we reject even recognizing Israel's right to exist. How could you possibly have a peace deal under those circumstances? No, and it is
yeah,
constant aggression from the Arabs against Israel.
Yeah, that's the thing. That when there is no actual full-on war, there are attacks all the time, and those attacks used to be from countries. Now they are from the Palestinians, who are again, as we've said on these shows, they are all civilians technically. Hamas terrorists are not officially soldiers, so you could count them, and many do count them as
Yeah.
civilians when they count so-called civilian deaths. So uh, Israel, even before it existed, there were attacks on Jews by Arabs
Oh,
in that area in Palestine, as it is actually was called, not as a as it is referred to now as Palestine, as the imaginary Palestinian state, which people want to make real, but that was the British mandate of the area called Palestine. And yeah, these attacks again started before Israel came into existence, continue to this very day. Sometimes they're just stabbing attacks. Sometimes they are October 7th. Sometimes they are anything in between. And any call on Israel, not to act militarily. This is why we repeat this, this point that people calling for a ceasefire are not calling for the end of killing. They are calling for the end of Israel defending itself. That is what a call for a ceasefire is.
precisely right. They can't defend themselves against October 7th atrocities. And I'm hearing more and more intellectuals and college people just simply denying. One of the sickening things I woke up to this morning with the news was a bunch of people saying there were no babies burned, there were no women mutilated, there were no young people at a concert mowed down indiscriminately, no, there were no families burnt alive in their homes. They don't believe the facts. And they simply are in dishonest denial about the genocide. I mean, and think about it. They call Gaza, that Finkelstein guy we were talking about, he calls Gaza a concentration camp. I mean, can you imagine the obscenity of that? And now they're calling what Israel is doing genocide. No, the people who want the genocide are Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and Iran, and the Houthis. They want to wipe out every single Jew in the area. They're calling for the genocide, not Israel. Israel is doing everything it can, in fact, doing more than I would say it should be doing, to protect civilians in Gaza. Well, the only ones, as I've said 1,000 times, that give a damn about civilians are Israel. They value every human life, and the only way Hamas values human life is as a number they can use against Israel, even if it's their own babies. It's disgusting. Well, people know my
Yeah,
opinion.
I agree. I agree with all of that, and much of it I will repeat on the reality show when we talk about modern day Holocaust denial. I want to thank our super chatters, Bonnie and Buster Jones, who says, "I'm convinced Jew hatred stems from Judaism being the one religion that barely tolerates selfishness. Most of the world doesn't share this tolerance." Now, I've heard this before. I have to say, when I went to school in Israel and there was Bible class, and that was draw in your notebook class for me, so I wasn't really paying that much attention. But I have heard this. I'm like, I'm always iffy about saying anything that sounds kind of positive about any religion. So James, I'll pass it on to you.
But the truth, look, I am an atheist, and I think religion is a pernicious influence as such across the board. But I have to sort of agree here. The only religiously based ethics that I even know of, and I come from a Christian background, sir, the only religious based ethics that I know of that even gives a small area, and it is just an area because there is a good deal of collectivism and altruism in Jewish ethics, but at least there's a space for egoism. If I am not for me, who will be? Okay. Now it's true. It says, if I'm only for me, who am I? But the point is, this is the Jewish maxim from Rabbi Hillel, centuries old, that actually allows for a certain degree of egoism. I know of no other religiously based ethics that even has that. So to some extent, I agree with that. They're further associated because of that with capitalism, because Arab Muslims and Christians in Europe could not charge interest on loans. And so they had all this kind of economic resentment against Jewish bankers and so forth. But they were the ones they depended upon for economic development, to be their bankers for centuries. And so that developed, there's all kinds of reasons. And as I say, it goes back even to the origins of Christianity and its political origins. So it's a very complex question, anti-Semitism. What's more interesting to me, for example, I mean, Joseph Epstein in the Wall Street Journal had an interesting editorial this morning on how Jews are politically without a home in America. You know, the Republicans have never really been their friends, and the Democrats certainly these days are not their friends. So they're sort of political refugees. And it asks why Jews don't identify with Republicans. Well, Republicans are associated with certain Christian values, conservative values, and horrible big business. And it's true, there's all kinds of discrimination, even in American history, against Jewish people not being allowed into some certain companies or country clubs and stuff. And that's associated in the Jewish mind with Republicans. So there's a lot of deep reasons why Jews are resented, it seems to me, but some of them
Yeah,
have to do with secularism and capitalism.
The evangelical Christians in the Republican Party are well-known supporters of Israel, and yeah, I think
Yes.
Israelis like that. They'd rather not really delve into the reason for that, which is that the evangelical Christians believe that once Jesus comes back, everybody will be converted to Christianity or killed or something like that. I don't know exactly. Again,
My
I
great grandmother, she is a Bible reading Christian, and God's plan will not be fulfilled until the Jews return and rebuild the temple. That mosque has got to go for biblical prophecy to be fulfilled for the Christians. So Christians, some evangelical Christians, definitely believe that there's a God's purpose, but they're in this sense like Jewish religious people. They believe that God has a special purpose. They're God's chosen people until God's plan for the Jews in Jerusalem has been fulfilled. These religious people, whether Jewish or evangelical Christian, are holding out for Jewish control of Jerusalem and rebuilding of the temple.
Yeah, a few years ago we had an episode about Israel where Tal Heinrich, who is now a spokesperson for Netanyahu, was a guest, and I remember Raka saying afterwards in the Clubhouse after show, in reference to Trump being supposedly pro-Israel, irrational people are not your friends. Yeah, they're not your friends, even when they seem like they're your friends. Now, I think Israel should definitely take advantage short term wherever it can, but yeah, keep that in mind. The people who really follow their imaginary friend are devoted to him and not to reason in any.
Bad argument for a good idea is more dangerous than anything else. and nothing could be worse than a mystic argument for at which Christians and Jews will often give for the state of Israel. No, it's the one I started with. The legitimacy of a state has to do with the degree to which it recognizes and enforces individual rights. And on that score, there's a qualitative difference between Israel and every other Arab Muslim state that surrounds them, night and day. And in that sense, Israel is the only legitimate state there. And if people like myself believe in freedom of immigration, doesn't that apply to the Middle East as well? Don't Jews have a right to migrate to Israel? And, in this sense, I have to agree with what Rucka said when he came back for his latest farewell. Like I say, I come from a Christian background myself, but I'm a Zionist. I think there needs to be a place where probably the single most persecuted minority worldwide needs to have a place where they're safe. I have to say, I'm a Zionist, even though I don't believe in the religious justifications for Israel. I think that there should be a state where Israel is safe. And I say that now because I'm witnessing anti-Semitism in my country that I never thought I would live to see.
Yeah, which I think I can easily segue into a pitch for membership and super chats by saying we are working here towards a world where a Jewish state would not be necessary. But yes, I agree with you. That is not the case today. The world is a dangerous place for Jews, and it makes sense to have a Jewish state. We have a couple of minutes left. Do you want to hear of some of the countries who voted against the partition plan?
Let's hear
Now,
that list.
Now, this is 76 years ago. I wouldn't necessarily blame people today for what their countries did, or I wouldn't blame. But so here are some of the countries voting against. So Afghanistan, India, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Yemen, Egypt, Cuba, Turkey, and Greece. I think I can blame Nikos for that one, but
I think we put it on Nikos personally, Greece. But voting against it is interesting to see a country like Greece, even India. You can see why India, though, for its at that moment of partition between Muslims, the horrific partition of India is to come here in just a matter of months as this is happening. Bear that in mind. The independence of South Asia from the British Empire is happening right now. So India I can kind of almost understand, but Greece?
Yeah, so with the Arab countries, we can also understand because they didn't want the Jews there, and they followed up with a war. But that puts everything else in a certain interesting context, especially the abstentions by countries like the UK, which I would say again, I wouldn't blame today's government for that vote. I would blame them for the recent vote on the ceasefire. Again, when you look at that ceasefire vote, which we talked about here, you look at the countries voting for it. Again, you saw Iran, you saw all these horrible countries, and you saw France and some other countries that are supposedly on the side of freedom, supposedly say they paid lip service to this bizarre statement of Israel has a right to defend itself. I mean, it's a unique thing that you don't say that about other countries.
Other countries, it's taken for granted. And by the way, the right to defend yourself means the right to destroy the capacity of the aggressor to do it again, to make sure it won't happen again. And it's not a question of numbers on each side. It's a question of destroying the aggressive capacity of the aggressor. And unless you can fully do that, you don't have a right. Whatever you mouth about a country's right to self-defense, you're actually denying them if you're calling for a ceasefire right now. Because what is Hamas doing? They're regrouping, they're reorganizing, they're getting people in, they're getting people out. They're using this moment so that it makes it harder for Israel to wipe out Hamas as they should do. And hopefully will get back to doing once the hostage thing is over.
Thank you, James. We are actually out of time, but on the reality show, we will talk about these people who very much do not want Israel to continue or to attempt to defend itself. I see it is now officially 6 p.m. We are already late. So thanks, James. We will be live with a reality show, Modern Day Holocaust Denial, in now, basically. Thanks. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Recording stop.